Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your channel of Math and Engineering Made Easy. In today, we have a practice worksheet on proportions and how they relate to percents, because a percent is basically a proportion out of 100. When you say percent, meaning how much of 100%, a cent is 1/100th of a dollar. So when we say percent, we are dividing by 100. So, now, here are some questions. In fact, I think I'll do the even numbers this time since we have how many in this? Well, there are four. There would be four problems. We'll do the four, and then if I find that they didn't take long, maybe we pick two more from the odd numbers. So the first question, which is number 2, it says, what is 40% of 120? They want you to write it as a proportion and then to solve it. Of course, since it's 40%, I know that like one of the proportions is 40 divided by 100. 40% is 40 over 100. This is the part. So if we want, we usually prefer in the beginning to say this is the part and that's the whole. So when they tell you what is 40% of 120, is 120 a part or is 120 a whole? You want 40% of something, so that's something, that thing is the whole. So I can say over 120. So what is the part? That's what I'm looking for. So you can give it any name. You can say P for part, X for a variable, A, whatever you want. Usually we say X, but there is nothing special about the letter, right? So now it became a very simple fraction problem. And when we said before that if I have an equality like that, I use the butterfly or the crisscross method. I say the product of these two, which is 100x, so we want to write an equation, equals the product of these, which is 120 times 40. And then I'm going to say, oh, I want x, so let me divide by 100. Now, please, when you divide by 100, when you have zeros, just I cross this zero with that zero and this zero with that zero. So it becomes x equals 12 times 4, x equals 48. And of course, this number has to be less than 120 because it's part of it. 40, 100. So 48, 120 makes sense, right? You see, it's 48 is greater than 40. In fact, it's 20% more, and 120 is 20% more of 100. Anyway, it's just you want to make sure that the problem makes sense. The answer is logical. What is 65? Oh, what percent of 65 is 115? That's tricky because many students, unfortunately, as I will show you now, again, I want to write it as a proportion, right? I don't know the percent, but I know 115 is a percent of 65. Some students say, but 115 is greater than 65. And so what? Remember, when you say percent, meaning if I divide the number by 100, so this number, I can divide larger than 100 by 100. I can have 200%. I can have 574%. I can have anything. So the proportion, the top number doesn't have to be smaller than the bottom. This is extremely important because here it says what percent. I don't know the percent. So it's X over 100. The X is the percent. Like here it was 70%. I'm sorry, here it was 40%. I wrote 40 over 100. Here it says what percent. They don't know the percent. So I write it X over 100. Of 65, the word of telling you that the next number is a total, not a part. what percent of something? What is 40% of 120? So the 120 was the total. So the total, which is the 100, becomes 65. And then the percent is the 150. So be careful here. As I said, the percent need not be less than 100%, like less than 100. The percent may be any number. So having said that, we are going to use again the product of these two. And we say 65 times x, which is 65x, equals 115 times 100. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 65 so that the x remains the same. I can simplify by 5, but it seems like it's easier just to use a calculator and get the answer. So x equals, it doesn't have to be an integer number. So I'm going to say 115, and then I add two zeros, which is multiply by 100 divided by 65, and I get 176.9 or 0.92 if you use two decimal places. Okay, so again, this would be the answer to number 4. If we move to number 6, number 6 says, an entrepreneur purchases items from a wholesale outlet and resells them on her own website. If she purchases an item for $18, and marks ups her merchandise 40%. What price would she sell the item for on her website? Solve using an equation. Okay. So when you buy something for $18, so the selling price equals the $18, and then she marks it up 40%, marks it up. So instead of, if this is 100%, it will become 140%. So meaning I should multiply, they want it as an equation, not a proportion. So I will multiply it by 140 and then divide by 100, which would be 1.4. We can play it safe and say 140 divided by 100. The 0 and the 0 cancel. 18 times 14 is what? 252. So that should be 25.2. 18 times 14 over 10. Oops, I'm sorry. I did I'm having the Band-Aid. It doesn't, sometimes it doesn't click properly. So 25.2, like we said, dollars. Okay, I've seen it a lot and I get really mad. Not by students, well, some students, but when you go buy something, especially in the old days when they didn't have like electronic registers and they do everything for them. When someone were using calculators to do this problem, they would say, okay, it's $18. And then marks it 40%. So they calculate 18 times 0.4. They get, of course, 7.2, the calculator. And then they go back and say 18 plus 7.2 equals 25.2. Yes, it is correct. But why do I do it on 2 steps? Or if that was like marked down 20%, meaning the 100 becomes 80, just multiply by 80 over 100, or better, even by 0.8. Instead of saying, okay, this number, and then 18 times 0.2, and then you subtract it from the 18 to get, no. Math we know that this basically, you see, you are adding these two things together, right? The 18, which is the original number, plus the 40% extra. Well, we learned in algebra that we can factor out the 18. I will get 1 from this and zero point 0.4 from that. So it becomes 18 times 1.4. So I can do it in a single step instead of two. Time is of essence in many exams. So you don't want to waste time in trivial stuff. Like I said here, 40%, meaning the 100 would be 140. So just multiply by 1.4. There is no reason to write 140 divided by 100 and then simplify. Of course, you have a calculator, but I'm saying even if you didn't have a calculator, you multiply 18 by 14 and then you move the decimal place one step to the left. Okay, no need to break it down in 40% by itself and the original price by itself and then adding them. Why do two operations when I can do it in one? The last problem here, I think it's a short lecture, so we pick maybe a couple more. A family deposited into an account $8,000 into an account 6 years ago. The account earns simple interest. Well, there's no such thing as simple interest, but just you will learn how to do composite interest in Algebra 2. But for now, what is the simple interest? Meaning if I have $100 and I place it, say, in an account that pays, say, 5% a year, then after a year, I will get $5. If I leave it 2 years, I get $10. If I leave it 10 years, I get $50. So this amount keeps being the same. In real life, we use composite interest. So if I get 5% the first year, then the next year I will start it with 105. So the 5% would be out of 105. So by the end of the second year, it will be 110 and a quarter, not just 110. And then the 110 and a quarter will earn 5%. So after a while, you will see that the money will grow faster, definitely faster than the simple interest. But here, because the equation for the simple interest is easy, I, which is the interest, is P, which we call it the principal, which is the first amount or the present value of the money you principal. R is the interest because it's a rate. That's why we use R. Usually, if I'm using a compound interest, we use the letter I for that, which is the big I here, but we use a lowercase I for interest, but this is simple interest or rate. And of course, T is the time. The thing is, they ask you for the interest, they earn simple interest at an annual rate. So the time is in years. So that's why here 6 years would be T. T would be 6 because it's annual rate. If they give you the rate as monthly rate and they want it 6 years, you have to change the years into month. So you multiply the 6 by 12 and use 72 for T instead of 6. So now they want you, what is the interest rate for the account? We don't know the simple interest, right? Because I know the principal, I know the original principal is 8,000. The interest rate, I don't know it, so it's R. The years are 6. Okay? Be careful here. This gives you the interest, not the total amount. This is just the interest you are earning over the 8,000. So at the end of 6 years, you have your original $8,000 plus the interest. And those together give you 12. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I thought this is the total amount. I'm sorry. This is the interest. So it equals 1,200. Okay? Again, sorry guys, I read that as 12,000 in the beginning, and I thought they want you to calculate the interest that would make make you have like $12,000 in your account 6 years later, which would be great. Okay, but here they tell you, no, you only earned the interest earned, the total interest earned, which is I, is 1,200, and I equals PRT. P is the principal, the amount you deposited in the bank. 6 is the years because it's annual, so these have to match. And then you are going to divide. First, for example, I can divide by 6. In fact, by 1,200 both sides, right? I'm sorry, by 48,000. So by 8,000 times 6, and by 8,000 times 6. Be careful because the answer to that would be a decimal. So you may get 0.03. You can leave it as that, but it's better to transform it into an interest rate as a percent. Okay, like the previous problem here, I saw the percent, 6.5% per year. I can write it as 0.065, but most people won't understand that. What is that? But everybody would understand it if you write it as a percent. So of course that would give me R because the 6 and the 6, the 8,000 and the 8,000 would go. I take 2 zeros and 2 zeros. 12 over 6 is 2. So I get 2 over 40, 2 over 80, which is 1 over 40, which is 0.025, which is, I multiply it by 100%. Percent is divided by 100. I told you, percent meaning over 100. So I multiply by 100, by over. I multiply by 100 and I divide by 100. So I didn't change anything. I simply, instead of being a decimal, I make it a fraction. So I get 2.5% is R, the annual interest rate. So the bank was paying 2.5% per year. Okay, the previous problem, well, it's again substitution, so I don't think it's, let's pick one from the first page. So for example, number 3, well, number 3 is identical to that. Oh, we'll do it anyway. Okay. The problem here said 70% of what number is 63? It's very important to see what is the part, what is the whole. So 70%, I have 70 divided by 100 equals part over total. Which one is the 63? It's part or a total? You have to say a part. Why is it a part? I told you, if it's a whole, we say of 40% of 120. So the 120 goes with the 100 total. What percent of 65 is the part? 115. So 115 is the part, 65 is the total. You say, how can the part be greater than the total? No, it's just the way we describe it. So as I said, the most important thing is that what comes after of is the total. So here it tells you 70% of what number, meaning they don't know the total. Of what? So the total is X. And 63 is the part. Okay? And right here, you can see that 63 is 7 times 9, so that should be 90 right away. But the way we do it is, again, we say the product of these two is the same as the product of those two. I could have simplified first, but I would write 70x equals 63 times 100, or 6,300. I divide by 70 both sides. So first of all, I see that one of the zeros goes away with a 0. 63 over 7 can be simplified as 9. So I get X equals 9 times 10 equals 90. So 90 is the total. And I think that's enough. We only have two similar problems. Okay, let's do this because that's the opposite of that. Here it says a pair of pants that regularly cost 55 are on sale for 35% off. 35% off, meaning if it's 100, I'm gonna sell it for 35 less, which is 65. It's 100% is 1, 35% is 0.35. So the part would be 0.65. 1 minus 0.35 equals 0.65. So here I said 40% up, marks up 40%. So 140 over 100 or 1.4. I add the 0.4, which is the 40%. Here I subtract the 0.35 because it's marked down. But the idea is the same. What is the sale price? Sale price equals the 55, the original one, times 0.65. And again, I see people multiply the 55 by 35% and then subtract from the 55. So why? Why do it on two steps if you can do it in one? So this is what, 35, 75? $55 times 0.65. Yeah, 35.7. No, I'm not a wizard or anything. I taught you how to multiply two numbers that differ by 2 or 4 or 6 or any even number. It's so easy. You take the one in the middle. Forget about the decimal place. We can move it to units. So suppose I want to multiply 55 by 65. What is the middle number? It's easy when it's fives, right? If they were fours or threes, maybe it's tough, but fives, it's easy. The middle number was 60. The square root of 6 is 36. So the square of 6 is 36. So the square of 60 is 3600. This is 5 above, this is 5 below. So you subtract 5 times 5, which is 25. So you get 35, 75, and then you move it to decimal places to the left. Yes, you learned that in algebra. You learned that x minus a times x plus a equals x squared minus a squared, right? So you learn the difference of two squares. It's blurry a little bit on the screen. Maybe that's better. So now x is 60 and a is 5. So 60 minus 5 is 55. 60 plus 5 is 65. So 55 times 65 is x squared, 3600, minus 5 squared, which is 25. So you subtract 25, you get 35. Again, you have a calculator. I know, I'm just saying you could have done it without that. Okay, I mean, since we did all of that, why leave the last one? Last one says, here you have $13,000, that's the principal, is deposited into a savings account that earns simple interest at a rate of 6.5% per year. How much interest will the money earn after 3 years? Because 3 is in years, this is in year, there is nothing to do. You don't, how much interest? They don't want to say how much will be in your account, but how much will the 13,000 increase by? Okay, so you say the interest I equals P, which is 13,000, times the interest. Notice, if you don't know, write it as 6.5 divided by 100. Or you can write it, so let's write it 6.5 divided by 100 times 3. Again, 2 zeros would go with 2 zeros. 1 0 would make the 6.5 just 65. It's easier, right? And then now you multiply 13 times 3 times 65. And you say, why don't you do it in your head? Yeah, I can, but why? This is 845, so you get 2535. 13 times 65 times 3. 2535, like I said. Because 65 is 13 times 5. 13 squared is 169, right? So when you multiply by 5, is like dividing by 2 and moving the decimal place 1 unit to the right. So 169. If we divide it by 2, you get 84.5. But then you move the decimal place to the right, and then you multiply that by 3. If you know that 3 times 45 is 135, you get 2400 plus 135. Anyway, it's not a big deal. You have a calculator. Mental math is not important in these problems, except that it can tell you, does it make sense? If it's 6.5 and this is 3, so you say, okay, let's assume this is 7%. So in 3 years, it would be 21%. Let's say 20%, right? Just to get a rough idea. 20%, meaning I will divide this number by 5. Dividing by 5 is like multiplying by 2, 26,000, and then moving the decimal place 1 unit to the left. So 2,600. I got 2535. Yes, because this wasn't 20, it was slightly less than 20. So it makes sense. I didn't get 25,000. I placed 13 and they earned 25,000, more than double, or I'm sorry, roughly double. Doesn't make sense, right? Your money won't double in 3 years if it's simple interest and it's only 6%. Okay? So just make sure that your answers make sense. I don't get 250%, for example, or 0.004%. Anything that doesn't make sense, it means we did some math error. Okay, so we are done with this part that dealt with, decimals and fractions and percents and increase and decrease, and all this thing is easy. We also learn how to solve linear equations. Of course, if you have one variable or two variables, and when they were two, can we use substitution? Can we use elimination? Which one works better in which case? Usually they tell you which method to use, but they would use common sense, and that would be too simple. I don't like that, by the way. The only reason we do it is that we want you to learn both methods. But I would prefer to give you a problem and then you figure out, for this one, which one makes more sense, and I use it. If I use the wrong one, I will give you full credit if you get it correct, but you were already penalized. You were using a method that would take longer for solution. So another student picked the correct one and got the answer quickly, so that person would have more time to allocate to other problems. That's the price you pay. But I cannot tell you it's wrong because you use this method. If you prefer it, it's up to you. You are taking the chance. Anyway, that's a completely different story. I'm not attacking the educational system or anything. No, you need to know both. But I prefer that at the end of the day, you make the decision, not me as an examiner. Again, outside of that, I wish you all the best. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me your comments. And as usual, I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, and hope to see you soon.